We read that. That النواسخ المبتدا والخبر. We read that. Right? So we're at كان وفاضل. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Tuhfa al-Saniyya, Sharh al-Ajrumiyya, we reached we covered the mubtada and the khabar, okay? And of course there's and this is very significant because the mubtada and the khabar are one of the two umdas of the sentence. The different books of grammar differ on whether they begin with discussing the fi'l and the fa'il first, or discussing the mubtada and khabar first. And there's a case for both. Right? One is, what is the asl fil jumla? What is the basis of a sentence? Is the asl of the jumla, like how do you talk about things? This actually goes into metaphysics as well. You talk about things nominally. You mentioned something, and you mentioned something about it, which is basically what the jumla ismiya is. And musnad ilayh. Or is the basis of, and of course then he goes into, are you talking about all things, both necessary and possible? The wujud al-wajib and wujud al-mumkin, that counts things. Or are you just talking about in creation? So there's a little bit of metaphysics that comes into discussing what kind of sentence is the basis. Okay? Or is the basis the fi'l? Okay? هل ترى شيئا إلا فعلا من الأفعال, as one of the poets said. Look around you. Do you behold anything except an action of Allah's actions? Okay? So is the basis the jumla fi'liya. And there's grammatical reasons, whether one or the other, that in the usage of the Arabs, which one comes first? Which is, there's i'tibarat fi taqdeem. When you put one thing before another, there are multiple, which is more frequent? What is the asl fil jumla? What is more noble? Sharh is one of the asbab al-taqdeem. But then there's also the consideration, what are we talking about in Nahu? What is the job of the nuhat? Yeah, but what does yeah, but what does that call? I'rab. I'rab. What is, if you ask a grammarian, what is your job description in one word? You say I'rab. Okay? This is why, for example, Ibn Hisham, his book Mughni al-Labib, it's called Mughni al-Labib, sufficiency for the smart and insightful, the labib, the one of insight, of lub. ومن يصل إلى لب الأمور, who gets to the heart of the matter. عن كلام الأعاليم, sufficiency for the smart from the words of the grammarian. They're called al-a'alib. So anyway, so those are things to be thinking about, and those are issues that come up. And those are issues that come up. And we talked about looking at better, or more comprehensive definitions of i'rab, of al-mubtada, right? And so that still remains requested, right? We'll look at that separately. So we reached kana wa akhawatuha. We'll begin with, we talk about order. You begin, Hamza. Hamza is like the A, and Zain is like the Z, so A to Z.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى: فأما كان وأخواتها فإنها ترفع اسم وتنصب الخبر، وهي كان وأمسى وأصبح وأضحى وظل وبات وصار وليس وما زال ومن فك وما فتئ وما برح وما دام وما تصرف منها نحو كان ويكون وكن وأصبح ويصبح وأصبح. تقول كان زيد قائما وليس عمرو شاخصا وما أشبه ذلك.
So here كان وأخواتها, okay? Of course, akhawat, this is majaz, but they're not actual sisters, right? Literally, a sister is a woman who shares the same parents, both or one, right? That's a literal sister, right? But akhawatu, so this is a type of majaz, but that it's become common, so it's a common usage. But what is the wajh of them being akhawat? Al-musharaka fil hukum, right? The ukhuwa is a musharaka fil nasab, right? You share the same immediate lineage, which is the same parents. Here the musharaka is in the hukum, right? That, what is the wajh of ukhuwa? فإنها ترفع الاسم. They put the ism in the rafa, and and here, if you were to reference what is mentioned in the Awamil of Imam al-Birgavi, he puts it in a little more technical format, and that would be a useful thing, because they're called nawasikh, right? So technically, if you want to look at the whole process, فإنها تدخل على المبتدأ. They enter upon فإنها تدخل على المبتدأ والخبر. They enter upon the مبتدأ and خبر, right? And they make the مبتدأ, be called the ism of kana, or whichever sister of kana you're dealing with, and it remains in rafa and puts the khabar into rafa. Ironically, the one that into nasb. Ironically, the one that changes name doesn't change in this case, right? But all the nawasikh, the same thing happens, right? Ism and khabar, right? And they put the khabar in nasb, and he gives a list of these. And these have, of course, an important role in transference of meaning, right? Because the mubtada and khabar, right, affirm, the mubtada is mukhbar anhu, right? يخبر عنه. That's actually a simpler way of describing it than al-musnad ilayhi, right? That's what you talk about. So you affirm something and you affirm something about it, right? Zayd ماذا؟ قائم, right? But it simply affirms a meaning. In logic, you say it's a hukum, right? The nawasikh bring a meaning of fi'liya into it, insofar as they take that meaning into a temporal context. You know, the meaning of time enters into it, right? Right? And he'll tell us about this. So it has a sense of meaning. And these are important words because they play an important literal and rhetorical role. These convey a lot of secondary meanings, each of these. So the commentator, rahimahullah ta'ala, Shaykh Abdul Hamid, says, أقول القسم الأول من نواسخ المبتدأ والخبر كان وأخواته. The first category of the three types of nawasikh is كان وأخواتها. أي نظائرها في العمل. They are alike. They are alike in their action. Nadha'ir is very interesting, right? Because you have two words, shibh, shabih, and nadhir. Right? Right? That's something. There's a question. What's the relationship? Shibh, that there's a similarity. Mushabaha. There's a similarity. And it's a root worth looking up because from that confusion comes from the same root. Ishtabaha. The two things looked similar, so you got confused. Nadir is from nadar. Right? It looks alike. Right? It looks alike. Often there's an implication that they're not quite the same. Right? Right? They look alike, so there's a point of alikedness, but in this case they're alike insofar as they have the same grammatical role, but they differ in meanings. Right? أي نظائرها في الحكم. وهذا القسم يدخل على المبتدأ فيزيل رفعه الأول ويحدث له رفعا جديدا. This is this is from the fawaid of Shaykh Abdul Hamid. Like, why don't you just call it if it stays in rafa, why don't you just call it مبتدأ كان rather than اسم كان? Because it's not, because the amil has changed. Right? So what changes? So it's a trick question. Okay? What changes when kana enters into the mubtada and khabar grammatically? What's the shallow answer? That the khabar changes. It becomes mansoob. But that's not sound. Both the mubtada and the khabar change. Why? Because the amil changes when kana enters. Right? So فيزيل رفعه الأول. Right? الرفع الأول الذي كان بالابتداء. The first رفع was due to a عامل معنوي which was ابتداء. Right? And now ويحدث its new عامل. So this is from the important points in the text here. ويسمى المبتدأ اسمه. Okay? Right? ويسمى المبتدأ right? اسمه. يسمى ما كان مبتدأ اسمه. Right? And the mubtada is called its ism, meaning what was the mubtada is now called its ism. Okay, so there's اختصار in the عبارة here slightly. ويدخل على الخبر فينصبه. Right? And enters upon the khabar and puts it in nasb. ويسمى الخبر خبره. So does it change its name? Yes. Because it's not it's not مبتدا and خبر. So we say المبتدا والخبر. Right? In the مبتدا and خبر, الخبر is a خبر المبتدا. Right? The L there is either للعهد, right? المبتدا والخبر. Right? The L there is either referential, يعني خبر المبتدا, or it's عوض عن مضاف, or it's in the place. المبتدا is like saying خبر المبتدا. So practically the meaning is similar. So now it doesn't actually retain its name. Okay? Okay? Now it's no longer خبر المبتدا, it's خبر كان. Okay? ويسمى خبره, يعني خبر كان. وهذا القسم 13 رفعة فعلا. These are 13 أفعال. So this is important as well. As we go through the categories of the nawasikh, these nawasikh, the nawasikh كان أخواتها, are all أفعال. That's significant, right? So these are, Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid has, this is another point that he implicitly mentions that the more terse commentaries go into, right? Right? That الأول كان, the first is كان. And this is a very useful chart. You could turn this into a chart. Right? كان أخواتها, because they're pregnant with meaning. That what meaning do they convey? It's very, very, very useful here. Right? الأول كان, and you do well to make a chart, right? كان أخواتها, they all have this. They all have the same grammatical role, but you make kana, and what do they do? And that's very significant. كان وهو يفيد اتصاف الاسم بالخبر في الماضي. Okay? يفيد اتصاف, it conveys the meaning of the ism being characterized. اتصاف, اتصف from the root of وصف. اتصف is افتعل. اتصاف الاسم بالخبر, of the ism being characterized by the khabar in the past. إما مع الانقطاع, it could have been, it was and ceased to be. انقطاع is from the infa'ala pattern from قطع, to become cut off. نحو كان محمد مجتهدا. Muhammad was a hard worker. Or Muhammad would strive hard. وإما مع الاستمرار, or with continuity. وكان ربك قديرا. And of course, translating the ones that with a common mistake, people, and your Lord was ever powerful. Then what happened? Right? Then what happened? Right? No, it's ma'al istimrar. Right? Especially when you talk about Allah, there's no past tense with respect to Allah. So, this have to keep that in mind. Like Allah said, when? Right? Like when you quote the Quran, it's probably much more accurate to say Allah says. Because it's eternally true. Right? But same with kana, how do you translate? You mean kana rabbuka qadira. Right? Of course, how does that apply to kana Allahu wa la shay'a ma Allah? It's not Allah was and there was nothing besides him. Okay? Allah is and there is nothing besides him. Okay? In that sense. Right? If you in absolute being. That's kana. Of course, if you were paying attention to kana in the awamil, there's a lot more to say about kana, but that's there in Bilgibi. You can, I'd encourage you to review that, because there are some couple of important points there. Because kana can come naqisa or tamma. We took that, but I won't get into that because the Ajrumiyya doesn't get into that over here. Okay. والثاني أمسى. Right? وهو يفيد اتصاف الاسم بالخبر في المساء. It conveys the meaning of the ism being characterized by the khabar at night time. In its primary meaning. Right? In its primary meaning. Right? نحو أمسى الجو باردا. Right? Right? That the weather has become cold in the evening. Right? But it may or may not convey that meaning. Right? Right? Because it can also just have the similar meaning. It can has the meaning of this matter happening in the evening time, in the masa. It also conveys the meaning of sara, of becoming. Right? 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 And this applies to the upcoming ones as well. That's used for the sense of becoming as well. Okay. والثالث أصبح وهو يفيد اتصاف الاسم بالخبر في الصباح. This connotes that the ism being characterized by the khabar in the morning time, right? Of it becoming characterized by it in the morning time. أصبح الجو باردا. Right? So it has a sense of becoming. Primarily, the primary sense is in the morning, but it could be more. It could be broader as well. Right? And of course, a lot of there's a dua, أذكار الصباح والمساء. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك etc. Right? And those are extremely powerful. Right? And that's why they're all كان أخواته convey deep spiritual meanings. Right? And they're touched upon by Ibn Allan and others in their Sharh of the, of the Adhkar al-Nabawiyya. Right? 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 Along this, I have woken up. Ushiduka, right? Bearing witness to you, or witnessing. Right? Right? Very powerful. Especially if you take the literal meaning. Okay. أضحى. الرابع أضحى وهو يفيد اتصاف الاسم بالخبر في الضحى. Right? It entails the ism being characterized by the khabar in the duha time. Right? in the morning time. أضحى الطالب نشيطا. Right? The student entered morning time, nasheet, vigorous, in a state of vigor. And nashata is to be active or vigorous. وإذا حلت الهداية قلبا نشطت من بعده الأعضاء. If guidance becomes rooted in a heart, the limbs that follow thereafter vigorously in devotion. أضحى. الخامس ظل. ويفيد اتصاف الاسم بالخبر في جميع النهار. It conveys the ism being characterized by khabar in the whole of the daytime. Right? ظل وجهه مسودا. His face became darkened by day. السادس بات. وهو يفيد اتصاف الاسم بالخبر في وقت البيات وهو الليل. It indicates the ism being characterized by the khabar in the time of rest, which is nighttime. نحو بات محمد مسرورا. Muhammad entered nighttime happy. Bata. Of course, Baytuta is, and from that you have bait. Literally, bait in classical Arabic meant a room. البيت ما يبات فيه. Don't see that? But its usages varied through the centuries. And then, of course, each in the hadith of the Prophet بات من استيقظ من منامه فلا يدخلن يده في الإناء حتى يغسلها فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده. If one of you wakes up from their sleep, let them not put their hand in the الإناء, in the water container, until they wash the hand first, either using a jug or by tilting the container. فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده, because they don't know literally where their hands went to sleep. But metaphorically, you said like where their hands went while they went to sleep. It's a metaphorical, because the hands don't go to sleep. The person goes to sleep, and when the person goes to sleep, where their hand went while the person was asleep. Right? And there's of course legal implication that that just as you don't put your hands in water, that one should not touch anything of value after waking up before washing one's hands. من باب التنسق بالنسبة من الآداب. والسابع صار, ويفيد تحول الاسم من حالته إلى الحالة التي يدل عليها الخبر. So صار has a sense of becoming. Right? It indicates تحول, the changing of the ism from its original state to the state indicated by the khabar. نحو صار التين إبريقا. The mud became an ibriq, a water container, a jug. The mud became, صار, as it says, so becoming. والثامن ليس وهو يفيد نفي الخبر عن الاسم وقت الحال. ليس indicates negating the khabar from the ism in the present. نحو ليس محمد ليس زبير فاهما. Right? Zubair does not understand. Right? Muhammad is an ism mu'azzam, so there's an example like that. First, but we have, we don't imply that the author has any ill adab or anything. What's his own name? Muhammad. It's Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid. And that's why this is from his tawadu. Okay? Despite being who he is in ilm, but in reading some of that, often the mashayikh will just put another name in. It's ascribed to Imam al-Shazili, Allahu alam bi-thubutiha anhu, that Muhammadun basharun wa laysa kal-bashari, bal huwa yaqutatun wa nasu kal-hajari. In al-Risala they do it in military style. Muhammadun basharun wa laysa kal-bashari, yaqutatun. Well, the yaqut is what? Yeah. Muhammadun bashar. Muhammad is a human. وليس كالبشر. He's not like بل هو ياقوت. He's a precious stone. He's a precious jewel, and others mere stone. والتاسع والعاشر والحادي عشر والثاني عشر ما زال ومن فك وما فتئ وما برح. وهذه الأربعة تدل على ملازمة الخبر للاسم حسب ما يقتضيه الحال. These four, ما زال من فك ما فتئ وما برح, all entail affirming that the khabar remains connected to the ism as the context entails. Right? So it has a sense of remaining. Right? ما زال إبراهيم منكرا. Ibrahim remains denying. ونحو ما برح علي صديقا مخلصا. Ali remains a sincere friend. And they connote different shades of meaning. All of these are tricky. Especially, ما زال is a bit easier, right? Right? But the others, they're rarer in usage, so don't use them except in expressions that you're sure of. They are sound Arabic and used Arabic. الثالث عشر ما دام ويفيد مناسبة الخبر للاسم أيضا. It also indicates the khabar remaining connected to the ism. نحو لا أعذل خالدا ما دمت حيا. I will not be critical of Khalid as long as I will not censure Khalid, not blame Khalid, as long as I remain alive. Ibn says, لا تستغربن وقوع الأقدار ما دمت في هذه الدار. Don't be surprised at the occurrence of disturbing things as long as you remain in this abode. Dunya. And then he gives us some extra details that are useful here, right? Which is, he says, وتنقسم الأفعال من جهة العمل إلى ثلاثة أقسام. These أفعال كان أخواتها in terms of how they act, there are three types. القسم الأول ما يعمل هذا العمل وهو رفع الاسم ونصب الخبر بشرط تقدم ما المصدرية الظرفية عليها وهو فعل واحد وهو دام. One of these أفعال I'm sorry, this is referring to these last this is referring to the last four. So one of them requires the ma al-masdariyya that indicates the dharf, something being the framework for it is dam. You can't just say dama, it has to be ma dama. القسم الثاني ما يعمل هذا العمل بشرط أن يتقدم عليه نفي أو استفهام أو نهي. And four of these require which are the other three, right, of the last four, require a nafi, a negation, or istifham, or a question, or a nahi, a prohibition, which is zala, you can say ma zala, or lam yazal, azala, with hamzat al-istifham, infakka, like man fakka, ma fati'a wa bariha. For them to act, one of these things needs to come before it. القسم الثالث ما يعمل هذا العمل بغير شرط. The third category of كان أخواتها, they act in this manner without conditions, which are 8 verbs, which are the remaining of كان أخواتها.
Sheikh, isn't there only 7 after? I don't know if it's a mistake here or. So it's كان أمسى أصبح ظل بات صار ليس, and then we already talked about ما زال ومن فك ومن فك.
كان وأمسى وأصبح وأضحى وظل وبات وصار وليس. كان أمسى أصبح أضحى ظل بات صار ليس. So this is one classification of كان أخواتها. Another categorization that is in terms of تصريف. So these are أفعال. The أصل الأفعال they can refer to past, they can be ماضي, مضارع, and أمر, right? So وتنقسم هذه الأفعال من جهة التصرف إلى 3 أقسام. القسم الأول ما يتصرف من الفعلية تصرفا كاملا. Some have full صرف. يعني أنه يأتي منه الماضي والمضارع والأمر. Take ماضي مضارع عن أمر. وهو 7 أفعال. كان وأمسى وأصبح وأضحى وظل وبات وصار. And these are all pretty much common. القسم الثاني ما يتصرف في الفعلية تصرفا ناقصا. Some only take certain forms. بمعنى أنه يأتي منه الماضي والمضارع ليس غير. Only the ماضي والمضارع come, not the أمر. وهي 4 أفعال. هي فتئ وانفك وبرح وزال. You say ما زال and لا يزول. But you can't, there's no, it doesn't take أمر. والقسم الثالث ما لا يتصرف أصلا وهو فعلان. أحدهما ليس اتفاقا والثاني دام على الأصح. Right? There are 2. Right? And of course, so there's 4 أفعال regarding which there's major difference of opinion. Right? If you look in the متممة, it lists them. يعني ومنهم نعمة وبئس وعسى وليس على الأصح. So there's some question. So there's some discussion on ليس, but while it has certain irregularities, the fundamentals are in place for its ismiyya. وغير الماضي من هذه الأفعال يعمل عمل الماضي. And other than the ماضي of these أفعال behaves in the same way as the ماضي. نحو قوله تعالى, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words, ولا يزالون مختلفين. They will remain differing. Okay? لن نبرح عليه عاكفين. We will remain attached to them حتى يرجع إلينا موسى until Musa comes back. فالله تفتأ تذكر يوسف. Okay? You get this from? فتئة. Right? Because فتئة, what has to come before it? One of several things, right? Either nafi or istifham or nahi. Okay? So that's kana. Okay? That is kana. And of course, what's the difference between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying Allahu, for example, Allahu Sami'un Alim. Allah is hearing and seeing, or hearing and knowing, and saying كان الله سميعا عليما.
كان affirms استمرار.
It emphasizes the continuity. Even though the one affirms it, so it's eternally true, but it's where the rhetorical emphasis is. But when any of these nawasikh are used in a jumla, right, in the Quran, that's one of the things to one reflect upon. Okay? And how does one reflect? That's why these sciences are called ulumul ala. They're instrumental sciences. One only benefits from them if one tries to use them. But of course, you use them, but how? Cautiously. Because you cannot do tafsir. But you reflect and you say, let me go check. What does the tafsir say? What's the point of studying ulum al-ala if you're not using the tool for anything? Right? And sometimes when you try to apply it, you're like, I have no clue what's going on. That's a good state. Right? 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 Because they say love begins with tahayyur. We've been bewildered. With hira. زدني بفرط الحب فيك تحيرا. Increase me in uncontainable love for you, in bewilderment. وارحم حشا بهوى لواك بلظى هواك تسعر. And have mercy on a chest that in the flames of your passion has lit up. Okay. Inna wa akhawatu. Kana and inna, them being next to each other, also has some major significance. Okay. So there's they say spiritually, kana indicates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's eternal oneness, the eternity of Allah's oneness, right? That tushiru ila kana Allah wa la shay'a ma'a. Allah was and there's nothing besides him. حيث لا شكل ولا رسم. When there are no forms and no appearances. These temporal nawasikh, amsa wa asbaha wa adha, right, are Allah's being manifest in the context of time. Okay? Because all of them point to to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ فِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ آيَةٍ تَدُلُّ عَلَى أَنَّهُ الْوَاحِدُ. Everything has a sign affirming His oneness, right? And so on. Right? And ما زال and ما زال من فك ما برح, etc. All of them remind us of the reality of the unchanging eternity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite this, all these changing manifestations, but He is the unchanging, right? Right? And Inna, of course, affirms ta'keed, confirmation, right? Inna, and it's a reminder of azm, of determination, right? Because one does not attain any of the aspirations called upon in our statehood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without azm, without resolve, right? Because aspirations are of two types. There's false aspirations which are blameworthy, right? Right? Like tama or ummiya, just being avid for something, empty wishes, and tama, right? Or false hopes. As for the praiseworthy aspirations, they're those connected with inna, right? With azm, hope, true fear. Because it's a false fear. Oh, like you cry once in a while, etc., but then nothing changes, right? It's like this, that's like drama, right? You put on some YouTube clips. Oh, ya Rabbi, and you okay, and then okay, let's get on with life. Right? That's not, right? Right? That's buka unifaq. Right? So inna is very, inna akhawatuha also have great potential significance. Inna wa akhawatuha.
المصنف رحمه الله تعالى قال: وأما إن وأخواتها فإنها تنصب الاسم وترفع الخبر، وهي إن وأن ولكن وكأن وليت ولعل. تقول إن زيدا قائم وليت عمرا شاخص وما أشبه ذلك. ومعنى إن وأن للتوكيد. ومعنى إن وأن التوكيد، ولكن للاستدراك، وكأن للتشبيه، وليت للتمني، ولعل للترجي والتوقع.
So, inna akhawatuha, they take the mubtada and it's now called ism inna, or its sisters, and it puts it in nasb, and they take the khabar of the mubtada and it's called khabar of inna or akhawat, and it puts it into rafa. Okay? And he mentions what they are. Now he does in the matan, he does something unusual here. What's the unusual thing that he does in the matan here? He gives a meaning. Now, the student could complain, why did you give me the meaning here, but you didn't give it to me elsewhere? Because kana does something as well, and the others, right? It's with tanbih. It's his method. He has a right. He didn't promise you. If he says, I will not mention any fawaid, so this is like, he mentions the fa'idah here, that each of these has a meaning. Right? And this is common. Right? You can't complain about it. But a point to notice is that sometimes, like, what is the method that's being used by a scholar? And sometimes it's of serious importance. Why? One of the very abused texts that has to do with this in the science of hadith is one of the great muhaddithin, al-Hakim, sought to write a book, sought to compile a book of hadiths that fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and or Muslim, but that are not mentioned by Bukhari and or Muslim. Rahmatullahi ala al-Jamii. It's called al-Mustadraku ala al-Sahihayn. Istadraka is sort of these hadiths fulfill their criteria, but they did not include them. So istidrak, like you are mentioning something that they missed out on. Okay? So he laid out the criteria. So he said, now, he was looser in the application of the criteria than Bukhari and or Muslim. Because the shurut of Bukhari, shurut of Muslim. He was a little more expansive on it, but he didn't necessarily apply it consistent. He wasn't as strict on it. He wasn't as rigorous on it. He wasn't as consistent. But some people hasten to criticize the Mustadrak al-Hakim, but the Mustadrak has two parts. He compiled it first, fully, in draft form. Well, that's called the Muswadda. It's called a Muswadda because it is typically full of edits. So the page is all black. And Muswadda, because there'll be so many corrections, the page is all black. And then the final copy is called, you need the Tabjeel. Because now you have a clean copy. Okay? Although some people, you look at their final copy, some ulama compiled, the ulama whose writing was poor or nearly illegible. And there's different madahib of the ulama in neatness of writing. But he only did tabyin of roughly half the text. So the half that he did tabyin of, the number of weak hadiths in it, or worse, that are very weak or potentially even fabricated, is relatively small. Particularly the very weak and fabricated. The part that he was still in draft form, there's a considerable amount of hadiths that are very weak or even fabricated. So Imam al-Dhahabi, one of the greatest of the mutaakhirin in the science of hadith, true giant, he did an abridgment of the Mustadrak of al-Hakim, right? And he put notes on it as well. Now, those notes on it, one of the things I never believe, especially in our time, when there's so much access to other sources of hadith confirmation, is someone will argue, they will try to pass a hadith by saying that al-Hakim mentioned it, وَسَكَتَ عَنْهُ الذَّهَبِ. Dhahabi was silent about it. That means nothing. Practically. Why? Because al-Dhahabi did not say that I'm going to comment on the weakness of every hadith that is weak. He just said that sometimes I'll point things out. And Imam al-Dhahabi is he's actually very young when he did it too. And one of the things he did when he was still a very young scholar with less experience, almost this a case that was done like out of practice. That it would, Imam al-Dhahabi himself wanted that book to be released. Allahu Alam, there's contention about it. But point being that he did not commit to comment on everything. So his silence is not an indication of anything. So to say وَسَكَتَ عَنْهُ الذَّهَبِ has very little, has next to no value. A very dangerous thing, and that's why sometimes you want to kick the tire, not kick the tire, but check. Like how precise is a scholar when it comes to hadith. And sometimes someone could be a great faqih or a great alim of tasawwuf or tafsir, but they may not have expertise in hadith. They'll use the expression أَقَرَّهُ الذَّهَبِ. The Dhahabi agreed. Just go and see what Dhahabi said in his work on the Mustadrak. And sometimes they consider Dhahabi not correcting the Mustadrak as being an agreement, which it's not. And that's very problematic. But which is why you don't quote, like a lot of people what they do, they'll quote the reference of a hadith from another book, assuming that the person they're quoting from, especially the authors of footnotes, are noted for their lameness, right? So here, the fact that he mentioned it here, he just shared a point of benefit. Okay? If he said that I am going to keep it brief and not mention extra details, etc., then if you mention extra details unnecessarily, then you can say, خَلَفْتَ شَرْطَكَ. But here he gave you a point of benefit, so that's why. So he tells us that inna wa anna are for tawqeed. You can say tawqeed or ta'keed, and for emphasis. Lakinna is for istidrak. It's for making an exception. That something is affirmed, and then you exclude something that you would have imagined originally entered. Like however. كأن للتشبيه. It's like أن with a kaf of tashbih. Right? For similarity. ليت للتمني. ليت is for wishing for something usually unfulfilled. That we'll see from the examples. It's a tragic word. لعل is for taraji, for being hopeful. And sometimes it's realized, sometimes it's unrealized hopes. Lovers say ليت لعل a lot. والتوقع, and hoping for something. So these are, very poetic words. Right? قال الشارح رحمه الله أقول القسم الثاني من نواسخ المبتدأ والخبر إن وأخواتها. So إن and أخواتها, the second of the nawasikh, of the things that change, that enter upon the mubtada and change it grammatically. أي نظائرها في العمل, and they're similar to it in action. وهي تدخل على المبتدا والخبر. They enter upon the mubtada and the khabar. فتنصب المبتدا, put the mubtada in nasb here, ويسمى اسمها. ويسمى المبتدا اسمها. Right? ويسمى اسمها. وترفع الخبر, and they put the khabar in rafa. بمعنى أن, again, this is from his فوائد, أنها تجدد له رفعا غير الذي كان له قبل دخولها. It gives it a new rafa other than the rafa it already had. Because what is the cause of rafa of the khabar? Really? No. In the mubtada and khabar, forget the akhawat first. Just forget the nas. In the mubtada and khabar, the mubtada is marfu' bimada? What is the khabar?
It's in the wrong. The khabar of inna is.
I think
We're not talking about inna. We're just talking about the mubtada and khabar itself. Right?
It isn't.
So this is useful awamil review. The mubtada and khabar, what is the amil of what's the amil? No, not right now. الحكم على شيء قد فرع عن التصور. You have to make تصور of what I want first. Right? So you have the mubtada and khabar. What is the amil of the mubtada being marfu'? What is the amil of the khabar? Right? So diagrams. There's three types of nawasikh that enter. Right? So what is the amil in each of those? I just put it in a diagram together, right? And it will help cement this. But the point is that the rafa' here, the cause of it is different from the cause previously. Right? بمعنى أنها تجدد له رفعا, it gives it a new state of rafa' other than the one that was there before. Why? لاختلاف العوامل, because the amil is different. ويسمى خبرها, and it's called its khabar. And here, of course, you have to be very careful. I was doing some background reading on, and you can get everything from joy and it's like delightful meanings to wanting to cry for the Arabic language. There's a lot of bad books out there. Like a lot, modern Arabic, there's a whole, you could go into history of modern Arabic grammar, right? But it's a battleground between tradition, modernity, and post-modernity, right? And be very careful. And at least there's some intelligent modernity, and then there's also like just terrible things. I thought I'd share. I decided not to do it. Share some simple definitions of the mubtada and khabar, but some of the definitions, like if that definition was given like 100 years ago, there's Mashaykh would ban that student from ever entering their desks. Okay? Shaykh Abdul Wahhab in his book. Shaykh Abdul Wahhab has two people between him and Imam al-Alusi, the Mufassir, in his chain of transmission. In his Alfiyat al-Isnad, he mentions one of the teachers, Imam al-Alusi, mentioned so and so, كان كثير العلم لكنه كان شديد الطبع. He had great knowledge, but he was very stern of temperament. فلم ينتفع منه إلا قليل. So few, if any, benefit from him. منهم الألوسي. Amongst those who did were al-Alusi. Apparently he used to sit in the class with a stick. Someone said he'd get very distraught, when people would say something bad. So sometimes non-deliberate, he ended up like swinging at somebody. Like ishqut, like not out. So people would be quite scared in this class, right? So people would stay away. But Lucy stuck with him, and anyway. So just be very careful, right? So this sounds awkward, but these things give us the understanding to be able to enter into the depths of the Arabic language. So just be very careful. Don't just pick up any book, even if it looks good, because now they print like all kinds of stuff. Right? Oh, there's a book by Imam Zamakhshari and it has a Sharh. So, right? Is it reliable? Is it suitable for one's level? Is this guy, is author an authority, etc.? Save yourself a lot of headache. And then the habit of students putting on their notes online is even more disastrous. At least some shaykh, there could be a hope, often unrealized. Sometimes it's just amal, it's wishful hope that they'll be precise, accurate, reliable. But student notes should be assumed to be poisonous. يدري أن السم في الدسم. Do you not know that the poison could be in the fat? Right? Even if like the nicest student, the most piety is not an argument. MashaAllah, he seems so. Okay. Okay. MashaAllah, looks so munawwar. Maybe he just stays home all day. Okay. So he doesn't have a suntan like the rest of us, or like the rest of the people. Okay. That's one of the ways students become munawwar, because they say indoors all day studying, like big deal. That's none of that's an argument. Okay. وهذه الأدوات كلها حروف. Right? Right? And these أدوات are all حروف. They're all حرف. كان أخواتها are all أفعال. These are حروف وهي ستة. الأول إن بكسر الهمزة، والثاني أن بفتح الهمزة، وهما يدلان على التوكيد. Both indicate emphasis. ومعناه تقوية نسبة الخبر للمبتدأ. This is an excellent definition of what is يعني what does إنا and أنا do. Right? These are all فوائد that don't miss out. Right? Right? And some of the mashayikh, what they do, get their students to do, is please compile a questionnaire for this book. If you can identify what's the right questions to ask, then khalas, ma'as-salam. Then you understand the text. If you miss things like this, then that's actually the exercise for like there's a comprehensive exercise due 60 days after we finish, which is to please compile an intelligent questionnaire, an intelligent, comprehensive test on the Al-Tuhfa al-Saniyya. You have to put, you have to catch what is important from the Sharh and to try to catch all of the fawaid of, and the key to that would be to identify what are all the fawaid of Shaykh Abdul Hamid. Right? These things, these clarifications that he puts in and so on. Right? Sometimes he adds details that are not in the Ajrumiyya. Much of that is there in the questionnaire, put in the text, but not all of it. Anyways, so it's the strengthening of the relationship between the mubtada and the khabar. نحو إن أباك حاضر. Right, so they're saying indeed or truly. They said أبوك حاضر, your father is present. Inna, it emphasizes the relationship between the hudur and the father. Why? Because Abuka Hadir, your father is present. Sometimes you affirm something للتقريب. That is, like your father is nearby. You say, your father is here. He's actually technically not there. Right? It's like he's just, like if we had the window open, someone's, turning in to seekers. Oh, he's here. Is he actually here? No. But you say, يعني? You say, زيد حاضر. حاضر في المركز. Could be. But إن زيدا يعني حاضر. Truly, I have to emphasize. But then, of course, it could still be being used metaphorically. It doesn't negate the metaphorical use, but just emphasizes that nisbah. It does not negate metaphorical usage. ونحو علمت أن أباك مسافر. I truly know that indeed your father is traveling. الثالث لكن ومعناه الاستدراك وهو استدراك, which is to make an exception, right? And this is again an excellent definition. وتعقيب الكلام بنفي ما يتوهم ثبوته is to follow a statement with a negation of that which would be imagined to be affirmed by it. Or the opposite. أو إثبات ما يتوهم نفيه. نحو محمد شجاع لكن صديقه جبان. Because المرء على دين خليله. A person will be on the way of their close friends. They say, Muhammad is brave, but his friend is Jaban is the opposite of courageous. What was the opposite of courageous? Cowardly. Right? And this is, of course, a very it's one of the qualities the Prophet ﷺ frequently sought refuge from, right? Jubn, cowardice, and bukhl, being stingy, and from ajis, incapacity, right? Kasal, and laziness, and ghalabat al-dayn, to be overcome by debt, or qahr al-rijal, and to be under the, crushing, forceful control of people. الرابع كأن وهو يدل على تشبيه المبتدأ بالخبر. كأن is for تشبيه, like to put a similitude between the مبتدأ and the خبر. كأن الجارية بدر. It's as if the young girl, or the jariya can be the young girl or the slave girl, is a full moon. Right? 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 As one of the grammarians says, كأنني تنوين وأنت إضافة. It's as if I am tanween and you're إضافة. Right? Right? Talking about it to his beloved. It's as if I am tanween and you're إضافة. Right? If I'm found, you're absent, and when you're found, I'm absent. Okay? والخامس ليت ومعناه التمني. ليت تمني is wishfulness, right? وهو طلب المستحيل أو ما فيه عسر. It's seeking that which is impossible or difficult. Right? ليت الشباب عائد. Right? If only youth returned. Right? 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 And right? Allah. وليت البليد ينجح. If only the balid is the dull. I don't find it very difficult to understand. Okay? So, Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, in his book Al-Faqih al-Mutafaqih, mentioned that a questioner came to one of the ulama from the Salaf and asked him a question. The scholar responded. The questioner said, "Lam afham," I didn't understand. So he said, إن لم تفهم لأني لم أوضح كلامي فأعيد. Then if you didn't understand, because I did not make my words clear enough, now I'll repeat. But لكن إن لم تفهم لأنك لن تفهم فلن أعيد. But if you didn't understand because you won't understand, and you can't understand, then I will not repeat. Right? So later, if only the dull, the dim-witted were successful, although they often are. Right? That if I had to put my money, what would we put money on the really smart student or the one who's not very smart, the one who's not very smart but is consistent, any given day I'd say this one will be successful, right? Why? Because the آفة العاقل عقله, right? And the stumbling block of the intelligence is their intelligence. They didn't rely on it's easy, I can figure it out. So they don't work hard. And it catches up on them. They don't memorize, they don't review, they don't retain. I'll figure it out. And then eventually they can't. Right? And because they don't develop their routines, they don't get very far. So they have to come up with alternatives. So they come up with all kinds of theories and ideas, and they start becoming, pontificating online. Right? Right? But the guys find it tough, but they stick with it, they review, they rewrite their notes, they do this, they do that, they get much further. Imams of Islam, there are many who are, Imam told you that story about Taftazani, right? He used to be the dullest student in Imam Eji's class. And then, so much so that if he started talking, everyone started laughing in the class because he said the craziest things. They just didn't get it. But then he's a method. You just say Sa'd, it's known. If they say Qala Sa'd, Sa'd will be in the There's many people called Sa'd. But he just known on that first name basis. Okay? And you don't have to put, and some people, their name is much more powerful than a title. Like and there's actually one of the qa'id of Imam Zarruq discusses this. Then why do we say Qala Abu Bakr? But we say Qala Shamsul A'imma, this, because what greater praise can you give somebody than being Abu Bakr? Right? There's people like Sa'ad, Sayyid, etc. The name is such that the text, if you look at the classical curriculum, the key text studied in Sharh was by Sa'ad al-Din al-Taftazani. The curriculum of Balagha was Sa'ad al-Din al-Taftazani. Mukhtasar al-Ma'ani and al-Mutawwal and al-Atwal. The key text in Aqa'id was Sharh al-Aqa'id al-Nasafiyya. The key text in one of the key texts in Mantiq was Tahdhib al-Mantiqi wal-Kalam by Taftazani. Key commentary in Hanafi Usul, even though he's allegedly not Hanafi, was التلويح على التوضيح by Sa'ad al-Din al-Taftazani and other sciences. Okay? And of course, key reference work in Ilm al-Kalam of the Mutaakhirin are two works. One is Taftazani's Sharh al-Maqasid, the other is his arch enemy, Sayyid Shaykh al-Jurjani's Sharh al-Mawaqif. And and that's والسادس لعل, and that's the problem. لعل ويدل على الترجي أو التوقع. Right? And it indicates hopefulness or expectation. معنى الترجي طلب الأمر المحبوب. It's seeking a matter that is beloved or liked or that one inclines for. ولا يكون إلا في الممكن, and it's only for possible things. نحو لعل الله يرحمني. Right? That it may be that Allah has mercy on me. ومعنى التوقع, expectation, is انتظار وقوع الأمر المكروه في ذاته. Right? It's to be awaiting the occurrence of something that's in itself disliked. نحو لعل العدو قريب. It may be that the enemy is near. قريب منا, from us. And then you have ظن, okay, and its sisters. Right? He says وأما ظننت وأخواتها فإنها, and these are used ظننت. Here you have to keep in mind some of these are much more rare than others. So ظن, حسب, right? Number of these, are common. Others are less common. So what they said, فإنها تنصب المبتدأ والخبر على أنهما مفعولان لها. So ظن and its sisters enter into the جملة اسمية and make both the مبتدأ and the خبر مفعوls for them. وهي ظننت وحسبت وخلت وزعمت ورأيت وعلمت ووجدت واتخذت وجعلت وسمعت. تقول ظننت زيدا قائمة ورأيت عمرا شاخصا وما أشبه ذلك. The commentator says رحمه الله هذا أقول القسم الثالث من نواسخ المبتدأ والخبر ظننت وأخواتها أي نظائرها. Same thing. Right? The third category is of the nawasikh of the mubtada al-khabar is dhanna and its sisters, the things that behave like dhanna, in that they turn the mubtada and the khabar into two maf'uls for dhanna or its sisters. في العمل. وهي تدخل على المبتدا والخبر فتنصبهما جميعا. Puts both in جمع. ويقال للمبتدا مفعول أول. The mubtada becomes the first maf'ul, وللخبر مفعول ثاني, and becomes the second maf'ul. وهذا القسم 10 أفعال. These are all 10 أفعال. الأول ظننت. ظننت محمدا صديقا. I imagined Muhammad to be a friend. الثاني حسبت. نحو حسبت المال نافعا. Right? حسب is to, is a considered imagination. Right? I considered. Right? I had thought wealth to be beneficial. The Uber driver came here, come 4 years from Egypt. He initially worked as a trucker. A smart man, good man. And then he left trucking. Said, I make a lot less money, driving a taxi than a truck. But with trucking, I'd be away all week. Says, and there's things that are more important than wealth. Says, if you don't pay attention to your children, they drift away. Wherever you are, especially in a place like this. خلت. الثالث خلت. نحو خلت الحديقة مثمرة. الرابع زعمت. زعم is very used for when you imagine something contrary to how it actually is. Right? زعمت بكرا جريئا. I had imagined, it's like i.e. wrongfully, and it's typically wrongfully, but not always. بكرا جريئا. جرأة is قوة الإقدام على الفعل. Someone who will go forth with determination into something. زعمتني شيخا ولست بشيخ. You imagine me to be a sheikh, and I'm not a sheikh. إنما الشيخ من يدب دبيبا. The sheikh is only who walks with a stick. For a while I was trying to walk with a stick, not to be shaykh, but because I had my vision issues, but I kept losing my stick. So, alhamdulillah. Now one of the points of adab, the fuqaha often use this to criticize someone's opinion in advance. One of the beautiful things that you see some of the mashayikh do, for example, Shaykh Muhammad Juma always, if he came to a text, it says, for example, it says, Za'ma al-Karhi, he paused there, said, ثُمَّ قَالَ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ, then he said, رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ, I noticed, I asked him after class, he said, because, he said, you know, Imam Shubula, he has the right to say whatever he wants about whoever he wants, because that's his level, right? For me to say, al-Karhi, wrongfully imagined, well, right? That's adab. Of course, you're affirming what is correct, but there's a correct way of affirming what is correct, right? هذا قول ضعيف. You're like al-hakim ala al-madhhab. No. Of course, we're not saying, okay, say everything is fine. No. But, say, وذكر, you say, yeah, so how one does it, which is why Ibn Abdin, for example, and he's a Sayyid al-Muhaqqiqin, Khatimat al-Muhaqqiqin. He frequently corrects Imam al-Tahtawi, but he corrects him by saying fafham. He doesn't actually, out of respect for al-Tahtawi, particularly because he benefited tremendously from his hyphen, there's loads of fafhams. Fafham, as he mentioned in the opening of the Hashiyah, Ibn Abdi used it to indicate that the reasoning or the position taken by al-Tahtawi was not correct. That's one thing you should learn good adab from the ulama, not ill adab. And because what they do, they have a right to do. You may not have the right to do that. Okay? Shaykh Amjad went to Egypt, visited one of the big ulama of Egypt. And the guy came, asked him a question. So they're walking after Jummah, the Shaykh was walking ahead, the student came, and the Shaykh stopped, said, Anta himar, said, you're a donkey. Says, and not just metaphorically, haqiqi, with two big flapping ears. Like, do I have to amr ma'roof and nahy anil munkar? So he actually asked the Shaykh, why was that? He said, this guy keeps uttering al-fadh of kufr. And I've explained why he shouldn't say that many times. So right now, the only thing I'm hopeful would keep this guy from committing kufr is a little bit of stick. Right? But you see that, and then you say, okay, you disagree with Zain, you say the same thing. Why? Because the Shaykh said it. No, because what that person is doing, they could also be wrong, but they may have a legitimate reason for why they're doing what they're doing. زعمت. The fifth, رأيت. رأيت, of course, رأي, رأى is used for literal things to see, but also used for يعني رؤية القلب or رؤية العقل is to have it to the saying of I see with the sense of to consider. Okay? نحو رأيت إبراهيم مفلحا. I saw Ibrahim, which is بإعمال الرأي, right? By exercise of judgment. Right? السادس علمت نحو علمت الصدق منجيا. I came to know that being true is salvific. Munji, it gives najat. السابع وجدت, I found. نحو وجدت الصلاح باب الخير. I found righteousness to be the door to all good. الثامن اتخذت, I took. اتخذت محمدا صديقا. I took Muhammad as my friend. والتاسع جعلت نحو جعلت الذهب خاتما. I took gold as a ring to give to his wife. العاشر سمعت نحو سمعت خليلا يقرأ. I heard Khalil recite. Yeah. محمود خليل الحصري. Good idea. وهذه الأفعال العشرة تنقسم لأربعة أقسام. These ظنا أخواتها are divided into four parts. الأول القسم الأول يفيد ترجيح وقوع الخبر. One category indicates that the occurrence of the khabar is more likely. وهو أربعة أفعال. نحو ظننت وحسبت وخلت وزعمت. Right? Of course, زعمت, you imagine that it will happen, but it's usually wrong. Nuance, right? That you consider the occurrence of the khabar to be preponderant. But in زعمت, it's generally wrongful assumption, not always though. الثاني يفيد اليقين وتحقيق وقوع الخبر. The second category indicates certainty or the realization of its occurrence. وهي ثلاثة أفعال. رأيت, I saw, right? Like it's so true, it's as if you behold it, although it's not yet the case, right? وعلمت, I came to know, meaning بالقطع. العلم is القطع. ووجدت, I found, right? And it's used both for, not just for tangible, but for intangibles, right? القسم الثالث, like I experimented with all kinds of pens. I found a particular pen to be most useful. Okay? Last 24 years. First saw one of the Shaykh use it. Checked out about it, and even university started using that pen. I've tried all kinds of things. Except for fountain pens, but that's a separate, comes with hassle. القسم الثالث يفيد التصير والانتقال. The third indicates becomingness or changing from one state to another. وهو فعلان وهما اتخذت, I took, وجعلت, I made. والقسم الرابع يفيد النسبة في السمع. The fourth category indicates a relationship in hearing. وفعل واحد سمعت. I heard, you know. So زيد قائم, سمعت زيدا قائما. Right? But this is a tricky usage of samia. And then there's loads of exercises which wouldn't hurt you to go through. And there's some i'rab practice which is very useful because there he introduces how you make i'rab of these statements. And the section on nawasikh comes with lots of related exercises. And then you have bab al-na'at coming up. Okay? 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 And right? Right? And the attributes, the na'at, right? You know, the na'at is tabi' lil-man'ut. The qualities follow the one, you know, what they're quality for. Right? So they say الصفة لا تفارق الموصوف. The attribute is inseparable from the one they're an attribute of. So he says فمهما ظهرت الصفات ظهرت معها ذات. Right? Because actions point to the one characterized, to point to the qualities of the actor. What is the act? The تعلقات of the قدرة of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? هذا خلق Allah. This is the creating of Allah. This is a manifestation of Allah's qudra. But is the qudra separable from the one it's an attribute of? Right? So, right? Which is why, one of the poets said, تأمل سطور الكائنات. Reflect on the writing that is creation. تأمل سطور الكائنات فإنها من الحق لك رسائل. For it is but messages to you from the most real. Right? Affirming with their reality or the tongue of their state, ألا كل شيء ما خلا الله باطل. Right? Affirming with their reality or with the tongue of their state that everything besides Allah is false, perishing. Right? Ghazali says the Ihya, actually two places says exactly the same thing, pretty much. That إذ ليس في الوجود إلا الله تعالى وذاته وصفاته. إلا ليس في الوجود إلا الله تعالى وصفاته وأفعاله ومملكته وعبيده من أفعاله. Because there's nothing in existence but Allah Most High, His attributes and His actions, and His dominion and His servants are from His actions. Okay? هذا خلق الله. This is the creating of Allah. لا تصل إليه إلا بعد فناء مساويك ومحو دعاويك فإنك لن تصل إليه أبدا. You could not reach Allah except after extinguishing all your blameworthy traits, okay? And erasing all your false pretensions. You would never reach Allah. لكن إن أراد أن يوصلك إليه, but if Allah wills for you to make you reach Him, قد قنعته بنعته وأبدل وصفه بوصفه. He covers your traits with His traits and changes your qualities for His qualities. فأوصلك بما منه إليك لا بما منك إليه. So He will cause you to reach Him by what's from Him to you, not from what's from you to Him. والسابقون السابقون, who are the foremost? أولئك المقربون, they're the ones who are drawn close. تقربوا إلى الله, they sought to draw close to Allah, but is it they who reached closeness? No, they were granted closeness by Allah. It's very clear. Right? ولا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنفل حتى أحبه. It is the divine choice that gives إثبات المحبة. إذا صح منك الود فالكل هين. If love from you is true, then all else is